What does it look like to come back to God from atheism? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Truth Culture. Today with us is a friend of the show, Jackson Taylor. Jackson, thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I think it's almost a year ago that you were actually on Truth Culture.
Yeah, almost exactly a year, I think.
And a lot has changed. And we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I said, you know what, you need to come back on the show and let everyone know where you're at. And so my first question for you is actually, where are you now on your spiritual journey compared to a year ago?
Yeah, it's funny because at the end, I reviewed that episode in preparation for this, and at the end you said, yeah, maybe next year we'll have you on and we'll just continue having you on as you change.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, just every year I'll be in a different place.
Yeah.
No, but I have had a really, I guess, fruitful year of like a spiritual journey, which is like a phrase I try to avoid because it sounds so new agey. But no, I think a year ago, and if you watch the podcast, I think you'll get this kind of idea that I was trying to pursue Christianity while digging myself out of, I guess, the hole of atheism that I'd put myself in. And I was like 90% there. I think I was doing 90% of what it takes to be a Christian, but the most important, like 10%, is what I was missing.
Yeah.
And so I started looking at coming back to God through Christianity. And I think I would say I wasn't coming back to God through Jesus. I think Jesus talks about,
Interesting.
how he is the only way to the Father.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going through Jesus. I was going through like this kind of structure of Christianity as if it was like this way of being. And so I was finding a church to start going to, and I was finding these people to talk about. And I remember I came up with these sort of unnegotiables that I had that I was like, I'm not compromising on these questions that I have. Like, I don't know for sure why Jesus died, and I don't understand prayer exactly. I thought, petitionary prayer seemed like it didn't work exactly. So I needed a real solid reason to pray. And I'll just go ahead and say, like, I think that's like the dumbest way to come back to God, is to like start by hardening your heart and saying, I will not compromise on these things. And so where I was, I think I was just in a really frustrated state. I think it's funny watching that podcast. I come off as very calm and maybe even overconfident. But at that time, I was really, really frustrated in my faith because I had been trying to come back to Christianity for over a year at that point. And it's just like I couldn't flip that final switch. Like I could do all the motions. I was starting to kind of relearn the like Christian lingo that all the Christians use. Like instead of, I have a hard day, it was like the devil was tempting me today. Like I'm using all the right words. Yeah. But there was that relationship that I just didn't have. I was talking a lot about God, and I couldn't seem to figure out how to talk to God and really feel like I had some kind of connection there.
Well, and the thing is, and I appreciate you coming on the show last year, because I got several people who are, I would say maybe 30, 40 years older than you, thanking me for having you on the show. And they said things on the lines of, this young man seems to be very upfront and honest about where he's at. And I think for those who watch the show, you kind of gave them a perspective that I don't think is often articulated. And so I know a lot of people were grateful for that. And so when we talked a couple of weeks ago, and you told me, yeah, I'm in a different place now, I was like, awesome. Let's get you back on so you can articulate where you are now. And what I discovered is we agree on a lot compared to where we were a year
ago. A lot more than last year, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, wow. It wasn't just like a small change. It was a big change. And so where would you say you are today?
Yeah, so today I call myself a Christian, and since probably December or January, I have now come, the first time since when I was younger, when I grew up being a Christian, I don't have any hesitation in saying that I'm not uncomfortable about it at all. It's funny, when I first left Christianity, I remember it was so hard for me to let go of that label, even when I felt like I was letting go of, first, well, maybe Genesis is just a good metaphor, then maybe even Jesus is just a good metaphor. Like, I don't know if he lived or died. Maybe that doesn't matter. But I still wasn't willing to let go of the label Christian. So I called myself like a Christian mystic, and then like a Christian who was truth seeking, which is obviously insulting. But no, when I finally let go of it, I started slipping kind of into atheism, and I think I was very happy to find a camp. Like nobody likes floating in the ocean by themselves, and so Christianity was this big ship that I was kind of born on. And then when I jumped out really quick, I found this other kind of camp of atheism, and it felt like I found these people online who were talking about why they left religion and why they were in the atheist camp. And I found Christopher Hitchens and these other kind of prominent atheists that I thought were really reasonable and that I could quote to, and it kind of turned into, obviously very sacrilegious, but it kind of turned into the things I could quote instead of the Bible. I could turn to, oh, well, this is like something smart that Christopher Hitchens said.
Yeah.
I felt good to be in a community because that's what I was used to. And so as I started coming back into Christianity, I was afraid to use that label again. And so at first I would say, yeah, I play with Christian concepts, or maybe I'm a Christian in more of a metaphorical way, like I'm a Christian atheist almost. And then the last thing I was using for a while before I finally would say I became a Christian again was, I would say I practice Christianity. Like I didn't want to use the term like people use it, like you're in a country club, like, or are you in or are you out?
Yeah.
And I'd say, well, it's like if you asked me if I'm a good person. I wouldn't say that I just am a good person or I'm not. I try to be a good person. I try to practice like good personism in the same way that I try to practice Christianity.
Yeah.
But no, I think I finally got to a place of Christianity where I'm just comfortable saying, yeah, I feel like I have a real relationship with God, a real relationship with Jesus. And there were a lot of components to that. It was a long journey, but I think the biggest part was the most fundamental thing, which is just reading the scriptures and then praying. I had a youth minister in high school who used to always say that whenever he was having trouble or stumbling in his faith or really frustrated in his life, he had a friend that would always ask him, whenever he would vent about anything, he'd say, well, first, before you keep going, are you reading and are you praying?
Yeah.
And he'd go, usually the answer was, no, I've gotten behind on that.
Yeah.
And I haven't been doing that. And it's like, well, that's okay. If you miss a meal, that's fine. You'll just eat a little bit more the next meal. Like it's to your benefit. It's not like you have to earn this, but like, yeah, of course you're going to be lost if you're not doing that. And for like a year of my life, I was trying to research prayer and understand it until finally I had someone in my life that said, why don't you just try it? Why, instead of just like doing it once, why don't you just try it for like a week or two and see if that affects your life? And at the same time, I started finding a church that actually felt really welcoming in the community to me. And I was praying several times a day, and I started reading the scriptures again. And within a week, I started feeling more peace in my life. I started feeling more joy throughout the day. And I genuinely didn't feel like I was talking about God anymore. I felt like I was talking to God when I was praying. And
Well, that's great. Well, let me ask you a question, because I know one of the big things that people were kind of surprised at last year is your view on the death and resurrection of Jesus. Do you actually believe, a year from when we last talked, in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ?
did I believe in it a year ago?
Well, I know last time you were on the show, you said that I think you said probably not. I think it's kind of the
Yeah,
the
I took
word.
kind of a Switzerland
Yeah,
stance
it
where
was-
I said it was a long time ago and I don't know.
Yeah, where are you with that question today?
Yeah, so I would say that I believe in it now. I think it's pretty fundamental to my faith, which is so funny. I think I just had a misunderstanding of it because I think I thought that it's like God. I saw it in what was the caricature of it that, and this is kind of shocking, but Christopher Hitchens and several other atheists will kind of look to some of the more fire and brimstone explanations of Christianity as like a human sacrifice cult. It's
Yeah.
like there's this angry kind of bipolar God in the sky who has to kind of take his anger out on someone, and he's going to take it out on the sinners, but then, his son comes out and he's like, beat me instead, and then just leave them alone. It's like that's kind of this caricature, messed up, contorted image I had. And so I had associated Jesus having to be here with God needs blood and someone needs to pay. And it's like, that made me so uncomfortable, and it was so part of the morality of why I left that I was
It's interesting. Yeah.
I was scared to ask that question again. And so now I really don't see it in that way, and I think that was just a misunderstanding. I think I think there's a lot of things about the mystery of why Jesus came to suffer and die with us and for us. And part of it I now see is it was like a powerful leader who has the option to leave his country when it's under attack, but instead he says, no, I'm going to stay here and suffer with my people. And I think in the beginning of time, when the Trinity was creating everything, it was like there was this moment where God decided to suffer with his people, and he kind of reached his hand into reality, and that was, Jesus entering time and space. And so it's funny for us, it looks sort of linear, because I remember a big problem with me was, why did it happen when it happened? What a random time for Jesus to come 2,000 years ago. If you're a young earth creationist, then what would that be, 3,000 or 4,000 years after the earth was created? But if you believe in evolution, then it's like a long time. It just seems so random to me, and I couldn't figure out why. And then it was funny. What I realized was, I'm trying to understand an eternal story from a really like time-locked perspective. So when God's looking at time, he's seeing it like this, and he decides to kind of come in time for probably a lot of reasons during the time he did. I think probably the biggest one was the sign of the cross. I mean, if you look through history, it's hard to find a death that is more humiliating and more full of public shame and suffering than the cross. I mean, even medieval times, when we look at like the guillotine and kind of, they're more gruesome, but they're quick. I mean, people die fast.
Well, I think I heard something, and I could be wrong about this, that if you were a Roman citizen, you weren't allowed crucifixion. You were usually beheaded. That crucifixion was reserved for non-Roman citizens and everything. But, I think, for me, we had a conversation about a year ago or two. I think that the book, The Case for Christ, and I remember you were saying that it wasn't really doing anything for you, the arguments he was making, and I kind of agree with you, because what convinced me on the resurrection wasn't the historical data.
Yeah,
it wasn't that Josephus said. It was the fact that God came down and he suffered and died for his people. And we know that sin corrupts us and is going to kill us. And he got in the way of that end result on the cross. And to me, I was like, wow, God would do that for me. To me, it was the relational component that was so baffling to me. It wasn't that you could prove it or go back in time and take a photo of it.
Right.
It was what it was for, and that it was that one event is for everybody.
Right.
Including me, and to me, I was like, that's shocking. That was like, holy smokes. It's almost like when you realize the crucifixion is kind of like, and I hate those kind of movies, but chick flicks, where there's that one moment when the guy goes out of his way to make that one captivating experience in the film, when suddenly the two of them say, okay, let's be together. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I hate using it as an analogy, but to me, once you realize what the cross is, it's that moment where you're like, oh, God loves me.
Yeah.
How can I not love him?
Yeah.
And so I always agreed with you. As the case for Christ, I just never saw how that's going to be the thing that gets that person to have a relationship with Jesus. And to me, I think it has to do with understanding the depth and love of God that gets you there.
I think understanding it in terms of as if we're living this sort of universal drama just didn't do it for me. And I think I see it more in like, this is something he decided to do. It's like,
sure.
So I'm learning, I'm in school to be a social worker. And one of the things we learn in social work is that, especially in medical social work, if you're getting in the room with one of these clients, the first thing you're supposed to do is find a seat or even get down like on one knee to talk to them, because you want to be like on their level. You want to like show them like, hey, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to help you. Like we're on the same team. And in sort of a much more grand scale, I think it was something like that Jesus chose to do to be on our level. Like what it is that we're going through in wearing this like this human skin, it comes with a lot of suffering and a lot of issues and a lot of problems, and like there's some real darkness. And I think God was like, I'm not going to let them suffer that alone. Yeah. I'm coming down. I'm going to be a part of that.
He won't give up. It's kind of, I don't know if it was, we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, or I had a conversation with somebody else, but it's like, how many leaders today in our world who are in politics or leaders of countries or monarchies that would actually come down and walk in the streets with the people and get involved in some of the lowest forms of living. Washing your clothes in a river and trying to find food for, and participate in what's considered to be the lowest of the low.
Mm-hmm.
And yet God did that. And to me, I think that lets you know that his level of leadership and rulership is on a completely different plane than what we understand leadership to be, even here in America.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so baffling about it. Because, I mean, even other cultures and religions will mock God, our God, and say, well, I mean, why did he have to come down and be a man? Why would God put himself in a position to be killed by his creation? That's ridiculous. And yet, that's exactly the claim that God is saying, no, I did that.
Yeah.
And
it's funny because it kind of turns the Darwin thing on its head, because Darwin's like, well, it's all survival of the fittest. It's only the strongest that survive. And the story of Christ is like, no, I'm going to come down and die so everyone who was weak will end up getting the reward of the strongest. Like I'm flipping everything on its head. It's like when Christ came, I heard someone recently use it as like, I don't think we understand completely like what happened then was like this kind of crack in the cosmos where everything flipped on its head.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's in Acts where they talk about the world turning literally upside down. And there's this kind of frame in Revelation 5:6 where it talks about Jesus being on the throne. It's like this lamb that's standing tall but slain, just like bleeding on the throne. And it's funny because we think of like, when we call Jesus or we call God king and we think of him on a throne, our understanding of hierarchy puts him as this big, standing, tall, booming, behemoth-like figure. But it's like, no, it's like this, not only just a little lamb instead of like even a sheep or a lion, it's a little lamb and it's bleeding. It's this permanently slain being. So our idea of what it means to be a king or have a kingdom is just completely backwards.
Well, there's even people who identify as Christians who struggle with the incarnation of Christ, because there's passages in the Old Testament that says God does not sleep. And I said, well, Jesus slept on a boat. Or James chapter 1 says God cannot be tempted. But Jesus was tempted. And it's like, you go to Hebrews, it says he took on flesh and blood like his brothers. Meaning that, God can't be tempted. God doesn't sleep. God doesn't even need to eat bread. But when he puts on flesh and he walks among us, guess what? He has to eat now. He has to drink. He has to sleep. And yes, that puts himself in a position to be tempted. And he put himself in a position to die because he took on flesh.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, wow, so he became weak so that we could become strong through him. I mean, that's profound. You know what I'm saying? And I've never been the same once I understood, that depth. And to me, that's the case for Christ.
He flipped everything on its head.
And just the fully understanding the concept and the intent and the love in the cross is what is supposed to be the power of that story. And but one of the things too, and I want to keep us going down the path of your journey here, is people are already watching and listening. It's like, wow, he's talking completely different now than he was a year ago. What was the thing that caused that shift, that change?
So I have kind of a funny answer for this, but my answer is in one word, it's grace.
Okay.
But that answer is kind of twofold. So there is God's grace that he has given, and kind of following that thread just led me right to, the front doorstep of the kingdom of God. And there's someone that I think God allowed to participate in this like grand story, and especially in my journey, which is someone I met about 1.5 years ago that ended up becoming my current girlfriend. Her name is Grace White.
Her name is Grace?
Her name is Grace, yeah. So it's funny because...
So when you said it was Grace...
So it was Grace, but it was twofold, because it was God's gift of grace, and then also God's other gift of grace.
Gotcha. Okay.
No, but it's so funny how those two things coincided so well, and as a kind of literary critic, I'm like, I love how that worked out. No, but I think what she did was I followed the trail of grace all the way to the front doorstep, and then it's like I was scared to walk in. So like, for example, I take cold showers every day, and sometimes I'll turn on the water and I'll kind of just like, even though I've been doing it for like over 1 year now, I'll kind of just stare at the water for a minute, and there's nothing keeping me. I should be doing it to like be efficient on time, but I just kind of stare at it because I'm not ready to go in. I'm like, it's going to be really cold when I get in there, but I know I'll feel better afterwards. And that's how I was kind of at I feel like the doorstep of the kingdom of God, just waiting there. And if someone walked up, they'd be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I was getting all the way here because I wanted to go inside."
Yeah.
And then Grace was the person in my life who said, "Why don't you just go inside?"
Yeah.
And I think I was scared, and what she did is she kind of grabbed my hand and said, "Hey, I'll come with you. Just like, let's go inside." And so she was the one who like kind of
That's awesome.
followed all of the little things that I had set up. Like, oh, were you wanting to find a church? Yeah, I really wanted to find a church that had a good Bible study with it, so I could feel connected in community.
That's
okay,
good.
have you talked to anybody about that?
Yeah.
You know, she's telling me like, we could find that. Have you tried to find that? No, I've been really busy. Okay, well, maybe we could make some time to do that. Okay, and then she's the one in my life where I'm like, I spent a year studying prayer and reading books on it, listening to sermons and listening to kind of like lectures on people talking about the ontology of prayer. And she goes, well, why don't you just try it? Why don't you just try it for a week or two? And then she's the one who's encouraging me to, one time, I felt really called out because I was talking about the Bible and kind of debating stuff with her. And she said, you know, how often do you read the Bible? And I was like, well, I read about the Bible all the time. And she's like, yeah, but do you read the Bible?
Yeah, there's a huge difference.
And I was like, well, I read it when I was younger. And so like, and that's one of the big things that's so funny is that I remember being younger and talking to someone about atheists, and they said, well, atheists actually know the Bible a lot better than a lot of Christians because they study it a lot. And I found that to be true when I became an atheist because I was studying the Bible, but I wasn't studying the Bible. I was studying people's opinions of the Bible and reading a lot about it. But there's something really transformative about actually jumping in there and about actually praying several times a day and about actually finding that community. And that's where I don't know, that's where I truly found Jesus. And I now no longer feel like I'm just talking about Jesus. Christianity's not a gimmick to me that I'm following to like be more at peace in my life. It's like, no, I realized that he was there all along. I feel like, and I want to mention this, I felt like I kind of came up with this metaphor that I'm so proud of, but I felt like the darkness that had kind of surrounded me in atheism was like a box of black paper. So I'm like inside of it and it looks really dark and it looks infinite. It just looks I'm in darkness. But like this box is like, it exists within this like great white chasm of light. And so I just kind of, I feel like grace in my life and also God's gift of grace finally encouraged me to just like stick my hand out, and I was able to pierce through that paper and then rip it out. And I was like, oh my God, I've been here the whole time. Yeah. I just didn't realize it. This whole darkness that's been surrounding me, it's been a lie that I believed. I took the bait.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there. In some ways, you know, you're almost describing, would it be accurate to say that when you were in the state of believing in atheism, because you use dark and black paper, and I associate that with, most people would say evil, but I tend to associate that with no hope. Yeah. You know, there tends to be no hope in that path. And would you say that's accurate?
Yes, but like I said, I almost think, I think darkness and the absence of hope, it's a lie. You know, like if I'm sitting in my room at night and the lights are out and I see something and it looks like a monster, well, that's a lie. It's not really a monster. Yeah. But the fear it causes in me, that's real. Yeah. And especially if I react, like that's real. But if I were to turn on the light, I will see that was never the case. Yeah. I was always safe. And so I feel like that's what happened when I finally turned on the light. I realized that God was here all along. He never left me for a second. He was just kind of standing back and just waiting for me. Yeah. He was always there. And I think I just started believing the lie that I was separated from him, and started believing the lie that I could run away from him.
You know, there's in the Luke account, the parable of Jesus, where he talks about the prodigal son. Mm-hmm. And when the son leaves, there's a verse that says, and when he came to himself, and it says that specifically, and that's when he goes home. And what I love about that parable, and it's really an emotional one, is that when he comes home, it's like his dad every day goes up to the hill just to see if this is the day that his son comes home. Yeah. You know, so it's like, so when he comes home, his dad's there and embraces him.
And he didn't say it took you long enough.
Yeah, exactly. You know? It was, but I just love that part where it says, and he came to himself. He was in that darkness, and he says, you know, something's wrong about this. And he finally realized that this is not at all what it should be about. And then he came and he realized, oh, my father was where it was where I should have been the whole time.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I hear you describing, so to speak, and that's awesome. But also, the other thing, when you were talking earlier and you were saying you were staring at the cold shower, and she was like, "Well, why don't you get in?" It's almost like that person who just they want to get into a relationship, so all they do is just read relationship books.
Right.
They take all those personality tests, and they're like, it's like,
They
wow,
never want to get out.
yeah, and all they do is just study and read books about relationships, but they just won't get in one. And that's almost how I felt you were describing.
Yeah.
your walk.
Christianity and my relationship with Jesus was an academic pursuit at best.
Yeah.
It wasn't about a relationship. And I don't think I realized that. I mean, I tried really hard, but I was using the wrong tools.
Yeah.
Like I was looking at it from the wrong angle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in some ways I got to interview Ethelgard Smith a couple months ago, and he talked about how young people, when they look at church, he's like, they have a good reason to ask, is this what it's about? Is the modern church really what God is wanting from what you get out of Scripture? If you go to Scripture and you read what the New Testament church was doing in the book of Acts, and you read the life of Jesus, and then you look at what is church today, and you're like, is this the end result of what this was describing? And I think there's that disconnect there that has made Christianity more of this ritual thing rather than this incredible life-changing and saving relationship with the Creator. And there seems to be that disconnect there. And I think I had to go through part of shedding off some of that, because that's kind of what Christianity is presented as, especially in America. I can't speak for other places, but it is kind of this ritual that you're a good Christian if you go on Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, Wednesday, and you participate in these things, and you're a good Christian if you sit in that pew and you just kind of say amen occasionally, and but where's the relationship? Because the reason why there are people in church today, and I'm not trying to bash church, because there are people who are sitting in those pews who go Sunday morning and Sunday evening and Wednesday because they love God.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand that part and you just see it as a process, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, I'm trying to be a husband, so I got to go to work and I got to mow the lawn and I got to. Are you describing a marriage, or are you describing the things that you decide to do as a husband? Because that real relationship that caused those behaviors is what matters most.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think sometimes that we lose sight of that, and the generation coming up doesn't understand the reason why we do these things is because we love God.
Right.
And that's kind of the missing link component.
Yeah, I think the thing is that there's this great poem called Manifesto Mad Farmer Liberation Front. It's by Wendell Berry. And no, it's fascinating. He basically explains how if you do everything by the book, then eventually people will basically have a window into your mind, and they'll be able to map out your every move into the future. He said, so every now and again, just do something that doesn't compute. And he's like listing all these things that don't make any sense. And one of the things is he's like love someone who doesn't deserve it, and just and start doing things that make no sense. And it feels like he's kind of mapping out the nature of love. Like, love isn't A plus B equals C. Like, I'll go to church so then I'll feel better, and that's love. Like, that's not love. That's a business agreement. That's a deal that you give me this and I'll give you this. It's like, love says, no, you don't do anything and I'll love you anyway.
Yeah.
I'll love you even though you don't deserve it. And I'll go do something for you even though you don't want me to, because I think it's what's best for you and what will ultimately help you. Love is going, no, I don't have to come and die for all of you, but I choose to do it.
Yeah.
Even though it makes no sense. Even though you guys will be the ones murdering me, I'm going to come and let you guys do that.
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
Yeah. Well, and love is very personal, and it's also personalized. When you read Song of Solomon's, there's some things Solomon says that are, I guess there were pickup lines. Like your nose is like the Tower of Damascus.
That one gets me.
Your hair is like a flock of goats descending down Mount Iliad. And I'm like, I don't think those would work today.
They're a little outdated.
And it's kind of like, if you love that girl, you'll buy her flowers. And then you buy the flowers. She's like, I'm allergic to flowers.
Right.
Right? Because love is personal. You need to know the person. In order to love them, you need to know what they like and what they don't like. And so I think that's kind of something that we don't step back and think of. We think of formulas rather than really trying to understand the other side.
Right.
And I think once you get to that position to listen and understand that person, especially towards God, is where I'm driving at. That's where it changes everything. Let me ask you as we wrap up, if you could offer some encouragement and some thoughts to someone who's currently in atheism or even agnosticism, what would you tell that person?
I think I would tell them, don't stop seeking and don't stop praying. And I know, obviously, if someone's leaving Christianity and they're on that trajectory, I don't think I'm going to be able to tell them a set of words that's going to stop them. But I would say don't stop praying. And even if you're uncomfortable praying to God, you go, well, I don't think this God represents what I understand of love. Like, fine, pray to love. Well, I don't think this God is truth. Fine, pray to truth. I'm of the opinion he is. And I think if you keep praying to truth, you'll be praying to God the whole time. And you'll eventually find your way back. I think we shouldn't live our lives in a way where we're scared of what's around the corner. Rhett McLaughlin said that recently on a podcast. I don't know if you've heard of Rhett and Link.
I have not.
They're a popular YouTube duo, but it's funny. He did a podcast a couple years back about spiritual deconstruction and how he left the faith. He grew up a Christian, ended up leaving Christianity. And more recently, he bought a Bible and has started researching Christianity again. And he's like, I don't know if it's going to bring me back to the faith. That's not my plan. I'm fascinated by the Bible and I want to research it. And he said, I know Christians will be looking at this and going, well, at least he's reading the Bible and maybe God will work through that. And he said, you know what? Honestly, maybe he will. Yeah. And I think it was really cool how he said it in that way, being like, I'm not trying to come back to Christianity, but who knows what could happen. But he said, I just have found that my life goes better for me and everyone around me if I don't live in such a way where I'm afraid of what's around the corner. Where if questions are coming on me, I'm going to engage them. And I'm going to find people in my life to talk about them, and I'm going to research them. And so if people are considering atheism or agnosticism, I think that in Ecclesiastes 7, there's this thing that the preacher writes, it talks about, where he says, like, one of the worst evils he has seen among the son is like this woman whose hands are like snares and nets, like who won't let go. And the person who pleases God, the person who seeks God, is able to kind of let go of her. But the person who falls for sin just stays with her. And I think that speaks to this sort of romanticism that surrounds the darkness, and this romanticism that surrounds like rebellion and even depression. And like we see suicide that's like crazy on the rise right now. And I know that's sort of the marker of my generation, where like we're in love with the darkness because there is this romantic sort of siren-like quality that I think he was alluding to in Ecclesiastes. But then he goes on to say, but the person who seeks God, the person who pleases God, he's able to let go of that. And so I think where I got stuck in atheism is, like I said, I liked being in that camp. And so when I left Christianity, I was like, haha, I'm able to question things and I can start challenging the status quo. And then I jump in the atheist ship and then I just never challenge their status quo and I never question their stuff. Suddenly I'm not humble anymore. I'm hard of heart. And I'm just the exact same person that I was frustrated at in the Christian ship, that kind of fundamentalist, I will never be moved. I will never be changed by anything. Wow. I was that guy. I just moved ships. I kind of had this moment of inspiration where I was able to move and then I stopped. And I think the best metaphor for it is in The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. Pretty early on in the book, he has this great metaphor about relationship with God, where he describes it as a mountain and a city that kind of is overlooked by this mountain. And if the city is like God, and your relationship with God is like being able to see that city. Imagine like when you start off, you're in this kind of balcony that's on the top of the mountain that overlooks the city. So you can see it. So it feels like you're close to God. But if you wanted to actually go down into that city, the trail that gets to it goes around the dark side of the mountain. So there's times when you're on the trail where you can't see it. And so he said, it's funny because when you're at the top, it feels like you're closer to it. But it's not until you actually start going towards the mountain where it feels like you're walking away from it because you can't see it anymore. But in proximity, you're actually a lot closer because you've started on this trail that will eventually get you there. The problem I had was that I got into the middle of the trail on the dark side and I went, all right, this is it. And I set up camp. And I stopped asking questions and I stopped seeking and I stopped praying and I just got comfortable. And then in my comfort, I became complacent, and that's when the darkness really starts doing its work and it starts creeping in. Also, I guess my last piece of advice would be, when you start really seeking, there will be a process of, I guess, shedding off dead weight.
Okay.
And shedding off, like, I guess, burning off the dead wood, you could say, that's kind of built up over time. And the same thing happened to me when I left Christianity as when I started coming back to it, which is I started having these like really, really vivid nightmares. And I actually went through kind of like the most dark places in my life were right as I left Christianity.
Interesting.
And right when I came back, like right before I finally flipped that final switch to being a Christian again. And I feel like because when I was an atheist, it's just like the devil didn't have to worry about me. He was like, he's good. I'm not going to have to work in his life. But as soon as I was like, no, I'm really being called by the Spirit and I'm going to come back, then I think the devil was like, oh crap, I got to step my game up. You know, I got to like,
warfare.
I got to really start working on him and pulling him away from that.
Wow.
And I think it was like, if I really wanted to be with God, was it worth the trouble I was going to have to put up with to kind of break through that? Like the cold shower. It's like, there's this sort of visceral reaction you have initially to it, but afterwards you feel so much better. And then you're like on the other side of it, you're like, why would I have ever wanted to stop? Yeah. And I think it's that death that, like in 2 Corinthians 2, that it talks about the people who are perishing, that they're dying, that like the words of the Lord will sound, they'll have the smell of death on them because I'm in the middle of death. And so it's I guess me clinging to the pieces of myself, the heart of heart me and the non-humble me that I'm not ready to let go of. But I guess I'd say just keep seeking and keep praying.
Well, you gave us a lot to think about, and I want to leave on a hopeful note. Not that you haven't given us a lot of hope, because your whole
nightmares and darkness.
Your whole journey is actually very hopeful for a lot of people. But I think, and I've had this conversation with Cade, who is the guy who's running the show right now as we speak. But he's noticed, and I've noticed that, you see Joe Rogan softening up to Christianity, Jordan Peterson suddenly going, that God thing and Christianity, Kanye West and several other people. Do you think there's something going on in our culture right now where there's a movement of people your age, around your age group, that are saying, let me rethink or look at Christianity again for a moment? Do you think you're seeing that right now in our culture?
Yeah, because I think the alternative to following the truth and following these kind of paths that don't really lead anywhere, I think they're destructive, and I think there's sort of this ever-present looming demon of nihilism that always wants to sneak up, and nihilism is believing life is meaningless. It's really not easy to get out of bed in the morning if you think that life is meaningless, and if you don't have something to hope for, and if you don't have your hope in something like Jesus, then I don't know what's keeping nihilism at bay. And I think people are feeling that, and I think it's really scary. Yeah. And I think luckily some people are realizing that even though softening your heart and kind of burning off these dead pieces of you, it's hard and it's humiliating. It's humiliating to not know. When I was an atheist, I think the biggest thing was I didn't want to believe something that was wrong. I was afraid to be wrong. And to have faith in something that you can't see. After doubting Thomas touched Jesus' hands, he was like, blessed are the people who can believe without seeing. And that's hard, because that means that I'm jumping on this idea that might be wrong. And for someone who's doesn't want their pride to get hurt like that, they don't want to put their pride on the line. But I think we have a movement of people who are realizing that the alternative, which is nihilism and darkness, is worse. And so we're seeing this slow kind of reluctant softening of hearts kind of across the board. And that's what I see. I see that kind of look in their eyes that they're like, maybe it's okay for me to let go of that and to admit the possibility of me being wrong.
Well, I'm a movie guy, and I can talk about movies. But the thing is, I've noticed a lot in Hollywood is I'll leave the movie theater and I'm depressed. There's so much nihilism, especially in the TV arena, which the quality of television has skyrocketed over the last 10 years. But it's so depressing. There's no hope. And I remember after watching movies, I'm like, well, I'm glad I have the Lord. Because if I saw the world that way, I don't know I don't know what I would do. And so, but thank you, Jax, for coming on the show and just talking about your journey. And I'm excited for you. And I joked about this with you a couple weeks ago, but I kind of want to see where you are in another year.
We'll just have yearly updates.
Yearly updates. Like, Jackson, where you are now.
Next year I'll be a Buddhist. Or something like that.
Hope not.
No, I'm just kidding.
But I'm very proud of you. And we've known each other and been having really deep conversations for 4 years or something like that. It feels like
for a while.
And so we've been able to engage almost every conversation you can think of when it comes to theology and faith. And I just want to say I'm proud of you. I really just someone who really took a critical eye on things. And I really think the faith that you have right now, I'm not really worried about you going into Buddhism, because I really think the journey that you're on has really kind of sealed that, no, Jesus Christ is the way. And
it's taught me a lot. It was a very hard and very long journey, and it's not over yet.
Yeah.
Like I will continue to hopefully know Jesus more every day, but no, I'm very thankful for my journey. I don't think it's for everyone. I don't think everybody needs to leave Christianity and then come back to like really know God. I think my journey was for me, but I've learned a lot through it.
And thanks for the grace of God.
Yeah.
Double meaning there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for watching Truth Culture Today. And Jackson, thanks again for coming on the show. And if you have any questions for me, or if you want me to forward it to Jackson Taylor here, just email me at info@ripplelight.com and we'll get back to you. But thank you so much and for watching this show, and God bless.